So hopefully that gives you a broad overview of current wolf management and what might be different under state management and what we're looking at evaluating. I'm going to turn it back to Kelly now for our question and answer session.
Thanks, Dan. So John and Glenn, can you start with your videos on, and I'll ask you to introduce yourselves, and then we have a couple of other speakers who might jump in, and if they do, they'll introduce themselves too.
Yeah, hi, my name's Glenn Delgides. I'm the Moose and Deer Project Leader for the Forest Wildlife Research Unit for the DNR and out of Grand Rapids. And I've been working with the DNR doing research since 1990.
Hi, I'm John Erb, wolf research biologist for the Minnesota DNR in Grand Rapids. Been with the Minnesota DNR since 1998.
Thanks, both. And then keep yourselves muted until I ask you a question. So first, just a logistical question about whether these presentations will be posted online. And yes, we will post these recordings or presentations in some form online. And that's another plug to go onto our website and join our e-newsletter so that you make sure you get all of the project updates. And when we post new content, then you'll be aware of those. So I'm going to pose our panelists some questions that we received during the presentation via the written Q&A. And if more questions come in, we'll try to feed those in as well. And then after we do a couple minutes of this, we'll move on to the spoken public comment. And so I have a couple of questions about population, the wolf population and population monitoring. The first one is a request to clarify how the 1600 goal was established.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'm sorry, Kelly, was that directed at me?
Probably. So how the 1600 goal was developed?
Yeah, so I wasn't involved in that decision, but it was adopted by a recommendation of the roundtable group, and it provided a number above the federal recovery goal, so that we would maintain a population above that level.
Thanks. Couple of questions about how we count wolves, and I know you covered some of that, about how we could be more accurate, if there are ways, especially in non-typical wolf territory, and then a question about how our techniques differ from Wisconsin's methods of estimating population levels.
Well, there's several questions there. It's kind of hard to go into all the details of how we come up with our population estimate, but we certainly have a report on our website that I encourage folks to take a look at. It's based on getting information on three variables: what parts of Minnesota, what townships are actually occupied or used by wolf packs. That's based on field sign and some habitat models that we do, surveys that we do every 5 years. And then once we have an estimate of occupied range, that's used to come up with a population estimate based on looking at how many wolf packs are within that, and we do that based on radio collaring a subsample of packs and getting an estimate of average territory size, and that helps us compute how many wolf packs likely occur within that occupied range. And then from those same collared packs, we get counts of how many wolves there are in midwinter, and that is used then to take the number of packs and multiply by average pack size to give us the number of pack wolves in the state, which is adjusted upward to account for lone wolves. So that's kind of a quick summary, but look at the report online for a little more detail. As far as how you can be more accurate. I'd answer that two ways. One is to say that question is part of the discussions that will be had by the Wolf technical team that is a part of this Wolf management plan update process. So in addition to the advisory panel, there's a Wolf technical team of biologists from state, federal, tribal organizations, and those questions will be looked at. But basically each of those pieces I mentioned, average pack size, average territory size, occupied range, you know, there are things that could be looked at to intensify the sampling. You know, more people on the ground, more wolf packs collared. There's also consideration of entirely different methods, but there's no way I can really go into that now. I don't know that Wisconsin's method is, I probably haven't read up on that for a little while, but my recollection is that provides an estimate of minimum population size. It's based on a lot of people on the ground just documenting wolf sign they saw, kind of gives them a minimum estimate of the wolf population. And when they attempted a different approach a year or two ago, I think it showed that there's you know, a plus or minus estimate that is not that much different than ours. It's lower, but partly because their population size is less than half of what ours is. So I don't know that there's I don't know that you can make a statement that says what they're doing is better than what we're doing. There are different scales we're working at. There's uncertainty in both, and we'll certainly be taking a look at ways we can improve that on this Wolf technical team.
Thanks, John. A couple of questions about research. The first is whether there's research on the ecological impact of wolves as apex predators and whether they have positive effects.
Could you repeat that real quick?
Sure. If there has been research on the ecological impact of wolves as apex predators and whether they have positive effects in that role.
Well, certainly there's been lots of studies of wolf prey interactions in Minnesota, wolf deer studies, wolf moose studies. I assume they're kind of referring to some similar things that have come out of the Yellowstone area after that reintroduction. Talks about how the reintroduction of wolves affected prey populations, which in turn affected habitats and even other species below that, such as, you know, beavers along streams after certain willow and other tree species rebounded because elk were not as localized or as abundant. So there hasn't been as much of that type of research in Minnesota. There's been some, I think in Wisconsin, some work showing how wolves certainly play some role in moving the deer around the landscape, which can reduce some browsing pressure. But Minnesota's a lot different than some of these other areas out west. We certainly know that wolves have effect on various types of effects on prey populations. They have behavioral effects. They can at least temporarily reduce numbers. They can move them around the landscape. So those things occur. But we also know that even with probably the largest wolf population or the most dense wolf population in the lower 48, we have no shortage of examples of the prey species still having notable impacts on plant species, you know, forestry concerns about white pine generation. So it's not as though the presence of wolves means that there are dramatic changes on the landscape to vegetation and other things, but there certainly are always some effects. They just haven't been studied quite as closely as what occurred out in Yellowstone.
Thanks, John. I have a couple questions that came in around control. The first one is, in the context of our goal for a healthy wolf population, why aren't non-lethal control methods used exclusively?
Hey, before we get to that, Kelly, can we ask if Glenn's got anything to add to the ecological effects? question. And certainly we have, he's had a long history of looking at the relationship between wolves and white-tailed deer and more recently moose.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say, or a couple of things is, after a 15-year study of deer from 1991 to 2005, we did find over those years of very varying winter severities that wolves are the primary source of natural mortality, as Dan mentioned in his talk, but the predation rate, or the mortality rate rather, can vary in a winter when most of the mortality on adult deer occurs, can vary from 3% up to 10, 11% during average or mild to even moderately severe winters. But then during a real severe winter, get as high as 30%. But that's relatively rare. And a number of the reasons why deer can thrive so well in wolf range all these years, with northern Minnesota having a continuous history of wolves, is because they not only have a good survival capacity, but they also have a very high reproductive potential and success. What couple of the interesting things we found is that from yearlings all the way up to 15 and a half years old, we have near 100% pregnancy rates of deer, of does in the forest zone. And well over more than half of those are having twins as well. So that's one of the reasons, those are a couple of the reasons why deer can withstand relatively heavy hunting pressure, predator pressure, and severe winds over the years. As far as moose research goes with and how it relates to wolf predation, as Dan mentioned, we found that 2/3 of the mortality of our newborn moose calves was attributable to wolf predation. And that was very consistent over 4 years. They accounted for 67% of the mortality of newborn calves. And that really does tend to limit a population, a moose population, and have a negative impact on overall population performance.
I'll ask two related follow-ups and then circle back around to the other topic. Glenn, would you mind muting while I ask things? So there was a question related to what you were talking about with deer and winter severity, Glenn. And so a questioner observed that north of Duluth, he's observed low deer numbers. And so wanted to know about how to manage deer and wolves with more severe winters, and noted the difficulties of getting young hunters interested with low deer numbers. So is there anything else you would add on that topic?
Yeah, I'm not quite clear what the exact question is, what the specific question is.
In areas with severe numbers, low deer numbers, how to manage wolves and deer together?
Oh, well, usually it's a combination of factors. If the deer population is low, I mean, one of our primary tools, of course, is managing the harvest, the human harvest of deer. And whether the percentage of or amount of antlerless permits that you issue over a number of years. What we found is that even when deer populations take a good nosedive, we're actually, for example, north central Minnesota, managing to bring down the deer population in certain units before the historically severe winter of 1996. And we were doing that, bringing it down because it was above goal, well above goal. But then the winter hit, and winter severity, undernutrition, and wolf predation really had a big negative impact on the population as well. And we lost probably about 30 to 40% of the population over that winter and the next year as well, because that was also a very severe winter. But that population, our study was still going on for a number of years well after that, and that population rebounded very well, very strongly within about 3 to 4 years by eliminating antlerless permits for several years. and also decreasing the harvest of bucks in those areas, just decreasing the hunting pressure. And, part of it's just up to nature. It's unpredictable. Those 2 severe winters were followed by 3 unprecedented in over 100 years of weather data, collecting 3 unprecedented mild winters in a row. And that helped the deer a great deal. As far as managing wolves in those areas, there's really not much we can do there on the endangered list there as a threatened species. And, direct management is out of our hands as a state agency. It's more in the hands of the federal government.
Thanks, Glenn. And one more while I have you. Can you mute for just a moment?
Yep.
I know you and I are having some feedback. So a question about how do moose get brainworm? And then has there been evidence of wolves transmitting brainworm particularly from deer to moose?
Yeah, it's a very interesting life cycle of brainworm that involves deer and moose. And where deer and moose have overlapping foraging habitats, so they commingle, deer will ingest gastropods, slugs, slugs and snails. Sorry, they'll ingest those. They get into the deer and go up to the deer's brain, migrate up there, reproduce, and then they excrete the larvae onto the ground with their pellets. And then those slugs and snails will crawl over the pellets, become infected, and then moose ingest those, and it goes up to their brain. The big difference is in the immune systems of the 2 species. Deer are rarely fatally affected by brainworm, where with moose, it's almost always a fatal infection. And I'm not sure I've never read anything about the role necessarily that if I understand the question correctly, there's something about how wolves are involved in that. And I've never seen any research that concluded that wolves are involved in that. But deer densities in moose range can certainly have an effect. And if wolves are having an effect on deer densities, that might contribute to a decreased incidence or infection rate of moose. But, nothing conclusive has been done to show that at this time, up to this point.
Great. Thanks for all that, Glenn. So I'll circle back to the topic of control. And the question I had left off with is, given that a healthy wolf population is our goal, why aren't non-lethal control methods used exclusively?
Well, I think non-lethal control methods are used to various degrees by livestock producers on their own. It's often used prior to them having a depredation. And the programs that are in place are reactive to where there's verified damage. As I mentioned, there are some programs that are helping provide resources to livestock producers to implement those, and where we can do that and help prevent depredation in the first place. I think that's a good strategy, but we also have a real strong, robust wolf population. And I don't know that the wolves that are killed are a concern for or having they're certainly not having enough wolves taken through control for livestock conflicts to have an impact on the overall wolf population. But yeah, we should encourage non-lethal techniques and strategies for reducing conflicts and identifying resources to assist with that.
Thanks, Dan. A question asking if we understand the efficacy of baiting and sniping, and then also the impacts of a hunt on pack structure.
I don't know for sure what's meant by baiting and sniping. If to the more general question of what's known about the effects of hunting on pack structure, there's still plenty to learn, and some studies certainly document regardless of why a wolf is killed. Doesn't matter whether it's a car or a gun, another wolf, that certainly removal of some individual wolves can cause various levels of disruption to the pack. But I hear these discussions a lot, and I think the biggest need in this discussion is what does that really mean? Everything has an effect on a pack. A severe winter has an effect on a pack. Deer density has an effect on a pack. Any mortality, again, like I said, whether it's hunting, whether it's hit by a car, killed by wolves, disease, can have an effect. But we don't have any evidence that shows under normal levels of hunting pressure that causes population level declines that are of management concern. If wolves were that sensitive to every little disruption, every little loss of a pack member, that the entire population would be affected, they probably would have went extinct thousands of years ago. So there certainly are effects, but whether they translate to anything meaningful at the population level always depends on, the intensity of removals, how many died, and you just can't make generalizations there. But outside of the real most intensive pressure on a wolf or high levels of mortality, wolves are certainly well adapted to deal with those things without it having notable effects on the population.
Thanks, John. So I'll pose a twofer, a quick one, and then a more complex one, and then we'll move on to the public comment period. And so the two questions I'll ask now are: guard dogs considered livestock? And then will the plan update include a component of climate change? And climate change and the impact of predator-prey relationships, I'm not sure if those are meant to be one question together or two, so you'll have to do some interpretation there, Dan.
Well, the first part about are guard dogs considered livestock? No, they're not defined or eligible for compensation where there's wolf damage claims. I think the role of climate change in wolf populations, there's probably a lot of uncertainty about that. What the benefits are to prey populations, maybe deer populations increase as a result, and there's higher number of deer available for wolves. Certainly there's some evidence that moose are having some impact from increasing temperatures, and is one of the contributors to the stress that the health of moose. So I think it's pretty complicated, and I don't know that there's a direct tie-in to wolf conservation and management that anybody would fully understand or have a recommendation that we could have some influence on wolves here in Minnesota. I don't know if maybe Glenn or John have, some thoughts related to that as well.
Yeah, I can maybe chime in a little bit, Dan. Certainly, even though we've seen these precipitous declines, first in the northwestern moose population and more recently in the northeastern population, there have been two fairly recent studies in both areas that have both found increasing ambient temperatures having inversely related to survival of adult moose. And those are just correlations. They're not cause and effect, but we've also been collecting other data, habitat use data, et cetera, related to air temperatures and stuff and relating that to forest management that have indicated that climate change could indeed be having adverse effects on moose population numbers as well as distribution. Seeing the kinds of rapid decreases we saw in the Northwest and the Northeast is very unusual, but actually the moose population across northern Minnesota has been decreasing, and their range has been shrinking since European settlement. And some of that's been due just to human encroachment and various human-related factors. But the other part may be certainly that one of the effects of the disturbances of the systems by humans is increased deer densities moving farther and farther north in the state, and the role that deer play in the life cycle of P. tenuis and how that adversely affects moose. So there's certainly, there's not a lot of conclusive evidence yet, but there's a preponderance of evidence accumulating that climate change is going to have an effect, or could be having an effect on the two primary prey species of wolves in Minnesota. How that will affect the population, though, is hard to say, because if moose decrease but deer increase, wolves may do just fine in response to that.
So thanks for all the great questions. There are more that we didn't get to, and so we'll see if we have time to circle back, or if some of our panelists may be able to answer them directly for you. We will move on to the public comment period. And so you'll be unmuted one at a time, and we'll get through our pre-registered speakers, and then if there's more time left, we'll get to those of you who have raised your digital hands. And so Wendy P. would be our first speaker. And again, we may just acknowledge your comment if there is a quick question or clarification, and then we'll address that too.
Thank you. My name is Wendy Pilot, and I live in St. Paul. Thank you for creating this virtual space, by the way. Loving an animal is not reason enough. I'm a retired pharmacist who relied heavily on facts, data, and studies. So naturally, I want to look at science when talking to you about why we should not kill wolves and why it is important to implement non-lethal deterrence. Fact, wolves manage their own populations on available prey and territory. In fact, the DNR's website says the wolf population in Minnesota is linked closely to the population of deer and moose. Simply put, fewer deer equals fewer wolves, and vice versa. So they do not need to be killed to manage their population. Fact, studies have shown that conflicts between wolves and livestock are rare, and implementing non-lethal deterrence are much more effective at reducing conflicts that do occur. And you did talk about both of those facts during the presentation, so I really appreciate it. And for me, loving animals, I don't want to see the wolves killed or hunted or trapped, and I would really love to see more non-lethal deterrence used. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. Steve P.
Hi, Kelly, can you hear me?
We can.
I'd like to thank the DNR for putting on these open houses and for coordinating with the International Wolf Center with the webinars. I have some comments and requests more than really a question. I live in St. Paul, but my family has property in Brainerd. I spend a lot of time hiking in wolf country with my dog, primarily in northeast Minnesota. I go to wolf country and hike because, to me, areas with wolves represent as close to wilderness as you can get. And frankly, I want to see wolves. I've gone to Yellowstone twice just to observe them. Last month, I was hiking south of Ely's Peak in Minnesota and found wolf tracks. My wife and I are spending our anniversary about 10 miles west of Grand Marais in about 2 weeks. We're going to go hiking in wolf country. Now, I understand that's not living with wolves. I can imagine that it would be hard to raise livestock with wolves. Given my interests and the interest of livestock producers, I ask that the DNR continue to work with the Department of Agriculture and take a balanced approach for everyone. and use a scalpel to address wolf depredation and not a shotgun approach of hunting. We've lived with wolves longer than any state other than Alaska. And so let's do this right and show the other states how to coexist with wolves. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Elaine P. Elaine, you should be unmuted now. It does take us just a moment sometimes to unmute people. All right, we'll try to come back to Elaine. Let's go to Richard N. All right, we might be experiencing some technical difficulties, or people might not be here. Let's try Nancy W.
Yes, hi, thank you. Thank you to Dan and the others for a great presentation. I just have two quick comments. One, I read through the plan, the 2001 plan. I know it, I think, pretty well. And I appreciate the fact that it says that wolves are allowed to naturally expand in their range within the state without a maximum population goal. My comment is, I would like to see the minimum population goal of 1,600 raised, although it's not the DNR's intent that it become a management objective. The legislature and other groups have interpreted that to mean a management objective. So I think that number should be a little bit higher, quite a bit higher. And the other comment I have is on Appendix 8 of the plan. It talks about the best management practices for livestock producers. And again, it says livestock producers are encouraged to use the best management practices, but that you did plan to update and distribute those best management practices. And I was wondering whether or not they have been updated and whether or not they are distributed to all the farmers. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Nancy. Thanks for the question. So some of this is managed or administered by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and it was in cooperation with some research that was done in the late 1990s and published in 2000. And so one of those studies was, basically looked at factors that predisposed farms to wolf predation, and they found no difference in chronic farms compared to farms that were nearby that did not have depredation. One thing that wasn't clear is what role disposal of livestock carcasses played in wolf predation. So it wasn't clear based on that research and what those best management practices should be. And so the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has some recommendations based on what producers have identified as having some effectiveness for reducing wolf conflicts, and you'd have to refer to their website for that. Again, this is older information and maybe something that needs to be identified for review and updating.
Thanks, Dan. We'll go to let's see. Is Tom M. on the line? Okay. So if we don't have Tom M., do we have Glenn B?
They already answered my question.
Oh. So I think we're unmuted, but we don't have anything to say. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. How about Wade O?
Wait, oh, that you?
Yeah. I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Do we have David A?
Hello?
Is this David?
Hello?
Hi, who's speaking?
It's Wade, but we got a comment.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering, we talked about the population back when they had the hunting season was at 3,000, and they wanted to take out 400 animals. Well, I don't know. I looked I'm kind of old school, and I looked in Hunter's Encyclopedia under the gray wolf, and they talked about that the gray wolves could have like 9 pups a year. Nothing was addressed in this deal about how many pups the wolves have each year and what the mortality rate is. But if there was 3,000 wolves and half of them were females, and they had even 4 pups, that's 15. That'd be 1,500 females at 4 pups a year. That's 6,000 pups, right? And when they make a target of removing 400, that isn't even a drop in the bucket. And also, on your chart, you showed that some years the population went down quite a bit. And I have a hunting shack east of Orr, about 15 miles, and it's over in that area where it's bucks only now. And over the years, the wolves got thicker and thicker, and the deer tracks got less and less, and the wolf scat was everywhere. And all of a sudden, the deer were gone, and so were the wolves. And so I wonder if these deer population drops is that you're not looking where the deer are now, that they just moved to where there's deer to eat, And so I wonder if your population estimates aren't askew.
Okay, thanks for that. I will say we may be skipping some people who spoke during previous meetings, so if that's the case, we'll try to get back to you at the end, but we're going to give new speakers the first opportunity. Do we have Tony C?
Why didn't they tell me about the population?
I'm here, Kelly.
Great, go ahead.
I guess for the most part, John and Dan answered a lot of the questions I had just with listening to them talk. But I guess one question that had come up to mind, I had been speaking with some of the trappers up in Alberta and Idaho. And I know obviously the geographical areas are different, but Idaho, I guess, has seen quite an explosion for wolf populations in their wolf management plans. Is there anything that Minnesota would compare as far as a management plan with Idaho?
I don't know specifically what we might compare. I mean, certainly it's a different landscape, different prey base. They've had some experience with seasons that have been going since about 2012. I think have pretty liberal hunting and trapping opportunities. So there may be some information that we would evaluate based on that, but as far as specific management actions, it would, I'd have to look at more recently what their plan involves.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Great. Do we have Adam C?
Hey.
Dad, Adam's on.
Be quiet. Hi there.
Hi,
so
go ahead.
thanks for having this. It's been a very educational discussion. I just want to say, so I live north of Duluth, Minnesota, about 5 miles. I'm a nature enthusiast. I love animals. I love wildlife, the wolves, the deer, the moose, everything that Minnesota has to offer. On the same side, I'm also a hunter, and to me, I'd like to see a balance. I guess more recently, wolves are kind of losing their fear of humans. The stories of wolves going on people's decks and eating their dogs, their cats. 2 weeks ago, Pack 8 wolves just chased my neighbor and their kid. So these encounters are becoming more common around here, and so I'm just curious, like, is there an equal balance of redoing the boundaries and having areas where people can go to northern Minnesota and enjoy the wolves in their natural habitat, but in more urban areas where people are inhabiting those areas and there's a risk to pets or to kids, to have a different type of management plan?
Thank you. Next on the list is Miles K.
You don't answer.
Yeah, thank you for having this. I guess I just wanted to start out by saying I hear from a lot of livestock producers. In fact, one just this morning that lost 24 sheep 2 nights ago, that they're having difficulty in getting claims verified due to the many factors. Obviously, ground type, hard ground doesn't leave tracks, weather, if you get a rain before it washes tracks out, things such as scavengers, and just plain due to the fact that sometimes there's nothing to find as the wolves eat all the evidence. I guess my question is how can producers best preserve the crime scene upon discovering a livestock loss, and who should they call first?
Well, they can cover any tracks or sign or evidence at the location of where the animal is killed so that it can be preserved. And they should contact the conservation officer in that area so that they can respond as soon as they can to the claim.
Thanks. And for our panelists, sorry, it's a little hard sometimes to judge if something's a comment or a question. We will try to be consistent in acknowledging comments, but if there are past questions that you heard that need an answer, weigh in to panelists. We'll go to Becky G. we have Becky G. Okay, how about Richard C?
Yes, thank you again for having this session. It's been very helpful to understand the issues. Quick question though. Part of the original wolf plan was to wait 5 years to establish some kind of stability and understanding of the demographics after the wolf was delisted, and that was almost immediately overturned. That seems like the equivalent of taking your clothes to the laundry and then dragging them through the mud because now you've got them clean. Why would we immediately overthrow the recommendation of the previous plan, and what makes me think this plan will be held to any more tightly?
Well, thanks for the question, Richard. I did answer that in the presentation. So the original plan was adopted in 2001. The first time that wolves came off the endangered species list was in 2007. And then the law that established a 5-year waiting period was changed in 2011. So more than 10 years went by, and I think that had a lot of influence on why that changed. We also had a lot of population information during that period, so that could be evaluated and considered when the season was first established. I think before we jump to another question, we could back up a few and address a couple of questions that came up from previous callers. And sorry, one thing I wanted to add to the last question is also that, you know, that was a legislative process. It wasn't the DNR initiating that change. So relative to how many pups are born each year, in Minnesota, the average litter size is about six pups per breeding female, and we know that not all females in a pack breed. So, you know, recent years we've estimated about 500 packs in our population estimates, and we do that in the winter months, as I mentioned during the presentation. So it's before pups are born, and that's when our population estimate is done. But each spring we have, you know, 2,500 to 3,000 pups born. But that survival of pups is pretty low, and they don't all make it to the first year. And maybe John wants to add something to the information we have on pups and pack size that might help answer that previous question.
Well, that was pretty much my same thoughts. You know, we have 2,500, 3,000 roughly pups born every spring, but only a small percentage of those make it to the fall population, and that's some of that's always going to occur, but it's probably particularly true because our wolf population is probably fairly close to carrying capacity. So from year to year, there's only so many wolves that can be supported. Wolves are still going to produce a fair number of pups, but there's a limit on how many are going to survive till fall. And so you can't necessarily use that number of 2,500 to 3,000 pups and then say, well, that means that many could be harvested, because most of those wouldn't even be still on the landscape. They'd have died, and by the time any sort of a harvest season came around. So.
Yeah, and then one other caller had asked about possibly having different management zones related to more populated areas, and I think that's a possibility. I think, you know, we could develop a recommendation to modify wolf management zones based on different conflicts or recommendations to have a higher wolf density or population in an area than in others, or an area could be more protected than others. But currently we don't have that. I will always recommend to people that regardless of where they are and what experience they've had in the past, there's always a potential to have conflicts with wolves. They may be attracted to areas that have more human activity because they have a pet or a dog or something that may attract them to the area. At times, wolves can be more bold and potentially more aggressive, especially with dogs at times of the year where they're denning or raising pups, and that's usually when we see those types of conflicts occur. But seeing a wolf on your back porch isn't expected, and most people aren't going to tolerate it. So there's probably only so many precautions you can take, and in the event that a wolf is a human safety threat, it's your right to protect yourself and others in those cases.
Thanks, Dan. Do we have Rowan P. on the line? Rowan, you're unmuted if you're interested in providing a comment. All right, let's move on to Holly E.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. Really appreciate the information you guys are providing, and I have a greater appreciation of all of the interests you're trying to balance. I've heard some other people echo my sentiments, which is definitely an animal lover. Hate to see them killed unnecessarily. So one question I have is, I did hear John just say that the wolf population is basically at carrying capacity now. So I was wondering, is there a point at which the wolf population gets too big? But I'm also aware of the fact that the human population just keeps growing and growing and growing. And I would love for us to make room for non-human creatures, in the world to still have space to live and thrive. So I'm not sure how to manage the human-wolf conflicts that arise. That's what you guys I know are working on. But one of my primary concerns is actually suffering, the suffering of animals, and in particular trapping. I'm just feeling like, isn't there some other means other than trapping, which I don't know enough about it, but I do remember hearing the story about a wolf that wandered into Duluth with a snare around its muzzle, and it was starving to death because it couldn't eat. That kind of stuff is just horrifying to me, and I don't know how prevalent that is or what kind of trapping you guys do when there's depredation claims. I'd love to know more so that I can sleep a little better at night and not worry so much about the suffering of animals, if anybody could speak to that.
Yeah, I'll try and tackle some of that. I guess the latter parts of your question, everybody obviously has different ideas or thoughts of what's humane. It's probably a subjective thing. I would point out that the tools used in depredation, the removal of wolves, are most commonly foothold traps, sometimes snares. I would also point out that those are the same tools that we wildlife research biologists use to live capture and radio collar wolves for research. We certainly wouldn't be doing that if we thought they were terrible devices that caused intense problem, for individual wolves or the population. Now, that's not to say there's not discomfort. Of course there is. You can't catch any wild animal whether it's in a cage trap, a foothold trap, a net gun, or anything else without some risk of injury or discomfort. So I would never say that there's a wolf that we catch in a trap, whether it's for research, depredation, or a trapper doing so as part of a public harvest, doesn't experience some discomfort. It's hard to quantify some of those things, but we have conducted research at the national level to quantify injuries to wolves in traps, and so some of that data exists. The wolf you mentioned that came into Duluth, that would be an example of unfortunate things that do occasionally happen. It's rare. Wolves occasionally get crippled and maimed on highways and run off into the woods with broken legs, and so I'm not attempting to minimize those. I'm just saying I think much of the information that's out there is not accurate. We use these traps to live catch them for research, and we wouldn't do it if we thought they were terrible. There's always some bad apples in any group that might do things that are unethical, not check traps, so on. But that's kind of how I respond to those types of questions. We always try and look closely at best management practices, both for our research trapping as well as what should be allowed to be used by trappers, whether it's for depredation work or public harvest.
Thanks, John. We'll go to a few folks with their hands raised for public comment. Do we have Cam T?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent, thank you. First off, I appreciate you hosting this, and I just thought I'd first pose the question and then explain a little bit, but does the DNR recognize the natural resource value of the wolves, and will that be reflected in the new plan? And I'm sure that you guys do. In fact, John just talked about the public harvest, but I just wanted to make sure that it was acknowledged that there are many of us active hunters, trappers, fishermen, outdoorsmen who would like to see the opportunity again to harvest them in a recreational aspect. They are a very smart, intelligent animal, and I had the opportunity when I lived in Canada for a bit to run a registered trap line there, and look forward to that opportunity in Minnesota. And we want to do it ethically. You're absolutely right, John. We want to be as ethical as possible, humane in that activity. But there is definitely a large natural resource of value to the wolves as far as being a resource to the public, and not just the plan very much makes it out as they're either good or they're from an anthropomorphic value, or they're bad because they eat cattle. But they're besides that definitely seen as a natural resource. And so I just wanted to reflect that and confirm the DNR sees that. So thank you.
Great, thanks for that. Dave L. Do we have a raised hand from Dave L?
Thank you for this opportunity. I have 40 acres north of Ely, and I live in the Northland. And I'm aware in my areas where the increase of the white-tailed deer has been pretty significant, I think, to the detriment of moose. I certainly understand the need for wolves to be managed, and particularly problem wolves to be managed. I'm just wondering if it could be focused more the taking of wolves could be focused more in the corridors around populated areas or where they are troublesome, versus going into areas where they're not causing trouble and where they're disrupting the social kind of structure of the packs. So I understand they need to be managed, but could we focus more on corridors where they're problematic versus just opening up the whole area? Thank you.
Thanks for that suggestion. All right, we'll go to Soren S.
Yeah, hello. So my questions and my comments are really about the impact of the loss of status as a federally endangered species, and whether or not we're going to see kind of the equivalent mobilization of dollars to protect forest habitats in the absence of the wolf being the most charismatic federally listed endangered or threatened species, because I don't think we've seen the rusty patch bumblebees listing bring federal dollars to conserve habitats or even investigate the presence of rusty patch bumblebees in some of the high potential zones in northern Minnesota that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has identified. So I guess my questions, I wrote them down, should be pretty quick. Has the wolf status prevented forest loss or conversion and habitat fragmentation? Will an effort be made to enhance the positive impact that control of deer populations by wolves on forest regeneration quality? For example, Lee Freelich's group shows that invasive earthworms are also reducing biodiversity and density of forest understory and possibly the capacity of forests to do carbon sequestration. So will we see, if we start to harvest or reduce wolves, will there be an equivalent effort by the DNR to enhance kind of the lost positive value of wolves by increasing investment in controlling invasive earthworms? And yeah, will the less charismatic endangered species have the same ability to capture the public interest and mobilize public investment in conserving natural forests? So that's it. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a pretty complex question, and I don't know that there's a direct answer for it that I can relate to funding or investment in forest management related to wolves being on the endangered species list. If the U.S. Forest Service budget is tied to that, I'm not aware of it.
Thanks, Dan. Daniel C. Let's see. Daniel C., do you have your face for a comment? Looks like audio is starting to come through. Are you there? Okay. Unfortunately, we're having some trouble with Daniel coming through. So let's mute him again. So I'll go back to a couple more of the written Q&As before we wrap up in the next couple of minutes. Why is there a larger number of complaints and removals in the summer months?
Could you repeat that, please?
Yep. Why are there a greater number of complaints and removals in the summer months?
Well, I think it primarily coincides with younger livestock on the landscape. They're distributed across more remote parts of, their pastures or farms, and that tends to be the highest, or the type of livestock that is most likely involved with depredation. It's also a time of year where wolves are trying to raise pups. So, and deer are probably in a little bit better condition to avoid getting caught by wolves. So if there's young, vulnerable prey out there, wolves kind of exploit that opportunity.
Thanks, Dan. A question about what are the next steps in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's determination related to the species on the endangered species list.
That's a question you need to ask the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Great. So we want to let folks out on time, and so we'll move toward closing the meeting. You'll see the contact information on the slides to get in touch with us if we missed you today. If you go to our website, we have the public input questionnaire. We also have a discussion forum and some other ways to get in touch. So we do want to hear from you throughout the next couple of months. Thanks everyone for participating today, for your questions and for your public comments. And Dan, I'll give it to you for the closing words.
Yeah, thank you everybody for attending tonight and the good questions. If there's anything we did not cover and you want to get more information on, please get in touch with us.
All right, thanks so much. We'll end the meeting now.